Hello. So, welcome to See.Mom.Learn, the homeschool pep talk. Today, I'm really excited to dive into 5 questions with Curiosity Chronicles. I'll share a little bit about why I thought this was great timing for us to have this interview, but then I'll turn things over to our guest who's been so gracious as to carve out time and be able to share a little bit about her background as a homeschool parent and as a curator of resources for homeschool parents, which I'm really excited about. That has come in the form of Curiosity Chronicles. So let's welcome Vivian.
Hi,
Um,
so happy to be
Hello.
here.
I'm glad you're here too. I'm excited. We connected at a recent homeschool conference, and
Mhm,
I'll just share the dilemma that I have, and then I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. But as a homeschool mom, I am a practicing Christian who in many ways prefers secular materials, and part of that is there I would like to be able to purchase like quality rigorous educational materials without necessarily funding being a huge funding source for ideologies or political views that I don't necessarily agree with. And so as a Christian, I think one of the things that is a little bit scary to me. I just answered this in a Facebook group. They were like, "What are your fears of homeschooling?" Is
mhm,
unknowingly funding Christian nationalism, which I think has a completely different definition. So I feel like folks who are like, you know what, the teachings of Jesus are things that I think are interesting, and looking
mhm,
after orphans and widows and loving my neighbor, and making sure that civilian affairs are separated from religious affairs. Like those are
mhm,
things that I identify with. When I hear the rhetoric around Christian nationalism, some of the things that I don't want to necessarily support just by wanting to buy a curriculum um, are uh, book banning and outlawing care post miscarriage.
mhm,
I don't want to have a hand in being more focused on forcing the Ten Commandments to be in public schools than loving my neighbor and community service. In my circle, I have so many moms that their faith compels them to be a fundraiser for the PTA, or their faith compels them to start a co op. It is because there is a need and they want to meet the need and leave the world a better place.
mhm.
And that's really what we're doing when we say, I want to buy a rigorous curriculum, not necessarily funding a political agenda that might not be really clear on the surface. So, with that, I have really been combing through secular resources and seeing how to incorporate it. And over, recommended to me was Curiosity Chronicles. So, we're going to do a deep dive, 5 questions with Vivian, who is the creator of Curiosity
Mhm.
Chronicles. But before we get into the 5 questions, I'd love to take a breath and take a moment and allow you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about how you came to this point.
Yeah. So my name is Vivian Myers. I'm the creator of Curiosity Chronicles, and I started making this curriculum. Gosh, it's been about 6 or 7 years now. And I started making it when I was homeschooling my own kids, and I felt like the resources available weren't what I was hoping they would
Mm,
be. And I had recently finished graduate school. I have an undergraduate degree in comparative literature and classics, and my graduate degree is in interdisciplinary humanities. So it's a broad,
wow.
a little bit of everything approach to history and culture. And I was really excited to share all of that with my children. And I was finding that the resources available weren't meeting my needs because
Mm,
I did want secular materials, that any beliefs, I wanted to be the one teaching them. I didn't want the curriculum doing the teaching
right.
for me. I wanted things to be rigorous and fact based. And so, because there was a hole in the homeschooling market at the time, I leapt into writing this. In graduate school, I had been teaching the history of Western civilization. So it felt like a very easy transition from what I had been doing. Obviously, we do global, not just Western with our materials. But at the time, it didn't seem nearly as big of a project as it has turned out to be. My partner runs a publishing business, and I was working in book design. So putting all those pieces together, it felt like a really important step to take to bring more accurate history to everyone.
I love that you share that taking on world history didn't seem like such a big task. And I think for me, I did not expect I would say by far the majority of our histories go to of our homeschool funds go
Mhm,
to resources around social studies and history and supplementing a well-rounded approach.
mhm,
But that's not how I was educated. And so
mhm,
I wouldn't have thought it would be a huge undertaking either, because I'm like, if you want to learn world history, you get a world history textbook
mhm.
and you read it, and maybe you don't finish it, right? Like
Yeah.
if time doesn't allow, and you get like a page every 300 years or something.
Yep. And
Yeah.
because my background is in classics and I was starting with ancient history, I felt very comfortable there. And so it
Right.
didn't seem as big as, now that I'm working in the modern era, how much I'm learning and exploring and diving deeper, the amount of decolonization I've done in my own thinking to make this truly global curriculum. It's been a wonderful journey, but a very long and difficult journey.
That makes sense. I know that you'll probably have an opportunity to speak more about that growth
Mhm,
in terms of perspective and even resources that are available as you have gone through these several years of
mhm,
producing that material. But even in my own homeschool journey, accepting the idea that decolonizing my bookshelf or our homeschool classroom is not going to be a finite task. Like, it's something
correct.
that is evolving.
Mhm,
And I have to be okay with being able to say, hey, you know what? This material that was the best resource at the time
mhm,
3 years ago is not the material at the time today.
mhm,
And I think that was a big change for me, because we try to teach what is reasonable. We teach from the public domain,
mhm,
because now there's this explosion of different points of view. We're able
mhm,
to round those things out, but even choosing very carefully from the public domain has been a challenge for us. So
mhm.
growing and changing, I love it.
Yep.
So that's a little bit about me and the context I come to the subject with, but
Mhm.
I would love to hear where you are kind of in your homeschool journey.
Yeah.
Um, what got you there, where you feel like you are now,
Mhm.
um, maybe what you wish a beginner knew so that they don't have to have the same pain points that
Mhm.
you have. So, where are you in your homeschool journey?
Yeah, so I have been homeschooling for 10 years now. I have 4 kids. We've been homeschooling since the very beginning. We decided on homeschooling because my oldest child is so similar to my brother. Like,
Mhm,
they're little carbon copies of each other. And my brother, he is now a lawyer and he's clerking for a federal judge. He's very successful now.
mhm,
But he almost flunked out of high school. He had multiple false starts in college because the way his brain worked and the way a traditional classroom were set up, they just didn't mix. And I saw all the many, many struggles that he went through that had nothing to do with intelligence or ability to do the work, that it was all about the
mm,
system that he just
mhm,
didn't fit into. And I'm seeing how similar my son was. It's like, I don't want to set you up for the same challenges I've already seen my brother go through. And so we decided that homeschooling was going to be the best way to give him an environment that he could meet his challenges in and grow through, as well as meet his strengths and thrive in. And so that's why we started the homeschool journey. And for every one of my kids, there's a different reason why we choose to homeschool, but for each one of them, we can meet them where they're at.
mm.
So this coming year, my oldest has decided he wants to go to public high school. So we're very excited for him to make that transition and take ownership of his education like that, because it's his choice. He's guiding the way on this. It's going to be a big change for us, though.
Sure.
The other three will be still staying at home. So I'll have one in middle school and two in elementary school. My youngest is in second grade. So I'm leaving that very early childhood education era behind. I've got boxes and boxes of stuff to go through, figure out who to give it to.
Oh, I love it.
Because now that we've got early literacy down,
Mhm.
it's a very new era. As far as what I wish I had known as a new homeschooler, a lot of it is advice I was definitely getting, but I wasn't listening to because I thought
Ah,
I was different. There's so
right.
much advice out there about, you don't have to be super formal. You don't need to be very structured. You don't need to push them to get through the subjects really quickly. Just like calm down and take it slow. There's so much advice about that.
Right.
And coming from my academic background, like I went straight from, public school to college to graduate school, straight into homeschooling. So I had that very formal educational environment my whole life.
Mhm.
Um, and coming straight out of that very formal educational environment, being told to calm down, slow down. It doesn't matter if you do it right now. Just, take it slow. was really hard to absorb. And now by my fourth child, I've definitely absorbed that. But with the older kids, I pushed them harder on things. The truth is, you know what? That was difficult because their brains weren't ready for that.
Mm,
And they definitely got there. That, you
mm,
know, things like spelling, big challenge for my oldest. And there was a lot of effort that went into that. And we just hitting wall after wall. And then one day it's like, oh, suddenly he's ready for it. And we can learn all these spelling rules and it doesn't have to be difficult.
mhm.
So believing all the advice from those homeschoolers have been around saying, it's okay to take it slow. It's okay to meet your child where they're at. I wish I'd realized how much value there was in that advice and not tried to do it my own way.
I really appreciate your thoughts and, like, your transparency there. I think for me, I got some of that similar advice, which was, every child is unique and
Hmm.
go at your own pace. And one piece of advice that probably I shouldn't have needed to be told is like, if there are tears, it's a good time to pause the lesson,
Hmm.
reset, come back to it later. And I was like, no one was doing that for me. And I was like, oh, right. Like that's part of why
Yes.
I went to homeschool.
Yeah, there's so
Um,
much unlearning from that educational
yes.
environment we were raised in. It's going to take some time to get out of that mindset.
And I think it's not so much that it was counterintuitive in terms of my case, and this may be different for you. It was more that there's so much hustle culture and
Hmm.
fear mongering around education, regardless of whether it's brick and mortar or homeschooling, where it's like, oh, they're going to be behind. Oh my gosh, your child is 4 and they're not reading War and Peace.
Hmm.
Then they're going to be behind. And that has funneled into entire industries,
Hmm.
right? But the idea that if we just sat down and quieted ourselves and learned alongside our children that we can have really incredible outcomes, it it was really starting to see it is what turned the corner for me
Hmm.
because there's so much noise around it.
For
Like,
sure.
yeah. So awesome. Okay. So I know that you shared a little bit about like your homeschool education
Hmm.
alongside your kids and how you have really, I think, touches in different parts of the grade school journey right now,
Hmm.
just with your 4 kids. But personally, how did you discover your passion for history? And what made you want to kind of deep dive into it?
Yeah. I have always loved history. It's just been something I've been interested in since a child. I loved historical fiction books. I had
Mm,
American Girl dolls I played with. I loved getting to go to museums. When I went to Washington, D.C. in the fifth grade, that was a big moment of being able to like see all that history up close and really fall in love with it. So that's been like kind of a constant interest in my life. When I got to college, it was comparative literature that I fell in love
mhm.
with because getting to see history through literature. And that's always been the thing I've been most passionate about is seeing history not strictly from the historian lens, but having all of the cultural aspects surrounding it. So we're not just like reading old documents and talking about wars and politics that didn't used to be my main passion, but being able to see the cultural artifacts that people have created. That's what really got me into it. And that's why I did the interdisciplinary humanities for my graduate degree so that it could take in all the many aspects of history. And one of the classes that was huge for me in falling in love with what history could be is when I was in graduate school. I took a class on pirates, and that was the whole theme of the class
No
was just
way.
everything pirates. We covered all the historical pirates from the Bronze Age all the way up to Somali pirates,
Mm.
but we were also covering all the novels that have been written about pirates, television about pirates. Um, the economics of pirates, the culture, and the
No
fashion.
way.
And so being able to take in all of that and see one topic from so many angles, like that is what I've really fallen in love with. And so, yeah, when I had the opportunity to write these books to meet a need for my children, I was very excited to bring all of that to it.
I love it. And I love like this class that piqued your interest in terms
Mhm.
of multiple points of view.
Yeah.
'Cause I was like, that's an outschool class I'd sign up for.
Yes. I would love to teach class just on pirates. They're so interesting.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. Okay, so I know that we just celebrated the 4th of July, but
Mhm.
in terms of world history, like current events that are going to be looked back on, We have the Olympics coming up this
Mhm.
summer, and I wanted to make sure that I asked you, while we had time, what are some ways to incorporate the history of Paris or of
Mhm.
France into the excitement around the upcoming Olympics, and tying that into our homeschool days?
Yeah. So Paris is a city that just has so much history in it. As you're watching coverage of the Olympics, they're going to be showing you shots panning across the city, showing this beautiful city. And pretty much everything they're going to be showing you in those just general shots, there's going to be history connected to that.
Nice.
And Paris has played a very pivotal role in history. So you can very easily segue from those things you're going to be seeing into a lot of historical events. So some of the events are going to be held in the Seine River. And the Seine has a lot of bridges that run across it. And that is actually really important to Parisian history. That if you go back to the Viking raids in the 800s, it was the low bridges across the Seine that stopped the Vikings and allowed them to resist the Viking siege of Paris.
Oh,
So just like little details like that, you're going to get a lot of history out of. They're going to be playing beach volleyball in front of the Eiffel Tower, which obviously has a lot of history connected to it. You can talk about just the history of modernization and the ability to build a tower that tall, that was a huge technological
ah,
advancement there.
right.
And also the reason the Eiffel Tower was built was to commemorate the French Revolution. They held a contest to see, they wanted to build a monument, the tallest monument in the world. And so there was a contest to see who can design the monument to build it. And the Eiffel Tower was the one that was chosen. There were a lot of different designs that were put forward. One was a very tall classical tower made of stone, but they
Mhm.
had to reject that because you can't actually build a stone building that tall without it
Oh,
collapsing. They didn't have
wow.
the technology. There was one
Like,
where they
that would be a
suggested building a
nightmare.
giant guillotine, which would definitely remind you of the French Revolution, but
But not in a
maybe
good
not the
way.
beautiful symbol.
Yes.
So as the camera is moving around Paris and you're seeing all these different landmarks, every single one is going to have some history behind it. And I think learning about the French Revolution is really great way to pull kids in. There's a lot of interesting things that happened during the French Revolution. And pretty much every building in Paris you could probably tie back to the revolution somehow.
I love it. So I feel like one of my favorite parts of homeschooling is that you get to learn alongside your
Hmm.
kids. And so one, just in that brief sharing, I learned some things. But also what I really love about this time in terms of explosion of resources around education, right?
Hmm.
Is that you just planted like a ton of seeds
Hmm.
that during the course of the Olympics we can go back to, and we can go to Teachers Pay Teachers, or we can go
Hmm.
to Google, or we can go to YouTube and find like age appropriate deep dives into some of the seeds that you planted, some of the things
Hmm.
that you alluded to watch the Olympics in a different lens. Like, of course, there's excitement around like the best athletes in the
Hmm.
world coming together, but being able to look at that in a broader sense, I really appreciate your perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. My kids are
Yeah,
definitely looking forward to it.
same. Like I don't maybe my homeschooler is 9. I don't
Hmm.
remember, like, excitement and buzz around the Olympics for the previous O Olympics, because probably too young, but I also think this is probably the first Olympics where we're fully recovered from, if we can be fully recovered, but
Hmm.
but beginning to transition again from that time where we were really siloed across the world,
Yeah.
um, and with that not being the forefront of the story, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'll be really interested to see how this Olympics plays out. I love
Yeah.
it. Okay, nice. So I know, still on the topic of history,
Hmm.
I was wondering, and like most historians, even just history buffs, right?
Hmm.
They have like a favorite time period or a favorite figure in history that really excites them and they can never know enough about. So I'm
Hmm.
wondering if you could name an event or a person in history that you feel is commonly misunderstood, or maybe they could be taught with a fresh perspective, like there are things that people don't know about them or they're misperceived. So, can you
Yeah.
name a person or an event that you feel like is commonly misunderstood in history?
First of all, there's so many out there. My favorite period of history is constantly changing based on what I'm currently researching.
Nice.
But as I think about something that we could learn from a new perspective specifically is, I think learning about the American Revolution, specifically from an international perspective, is really important to do. Because as
Mhm.
Americans, we learn about the American Revolution all the time. It's one of the things they definitely hit in school, but it is covered from such an American perspective. And it's often the only revolution in the Americas that we do talk about.
True.
And so it's hard to understand how significant is what happened to the Americas and why do these different parts of the revolution matter or don't matter as much if it's the only one that we're looking at. And so I think
Mm.
taking that international perspective and seeing more of what was happening around the Americas is really important. So the Haitian Revolution started in 1791. It's just a few years after the American Revolution. It's the second one in the Americas. And that revolution went very, very differently than the American Revolution. I think seeing the differences between the two is really important because after the American Revolution, America went on to very much thrive economically. Of course, there were challenges and problems,
Mhm.
but we became trading partners with Great Britain. They gave us the Ohio country in the Treaty of Paris. So that's the entire Ohio River Valley. And that laid the foundation of American westward expansion. And when the
Mhm.
British did that, that land was inhabited by indigenous peoples, most of whom had allied with the British during the Revolutionary War. So they gave away their allies' homeland so the United States could thrive economically so that they would have a trading partner. And so much of that lays the foundation for what happened to the United States. But then if you contrast that with Haiti, where Haiti fights for their independence and they do win it militarily, um, but the French refused to acknowledge it, and nobody else wanted to acknowledge it either. And that very
Right.
much comes down to the population of Haiti, that
Mhm.
90% of Haiti's population was enslaved. And so this was a country of Black people. And so for Europe to acknowledge Haiti's independence would be to acknowledge it's possible for a Black nation to be equal to a white nation. And that was very threatening to white supremacy. So even though they won their independence in 1804, no one would acknowledge it. And so Haiti, as an
Wow.
export economy, they couldn't rebuild. They couldn't sell the sugar and the coffee that they were growing. And they were stuck in a depleted state for a long time. And it wasn't until 1825 that the French finally said, we'll acknowledge your independence and we'll start trading with you. But the terms of that is they had to buy their independence. The French set an absolutely ridiculous price on Haitian independence. It was so high, it was in billions of modern dollars. And so
Wow.
they eventually reduced how much they had to pay because Haiti would never be able to pay it off. But even at that reduced rate, they weren't able to pay it off until after World War II. And so when you look at the current state of the United States versus
Mm.
Haiti, why did those countries develop so differently? That comes right down to their revolutions and what
Mhm.
terms they got in the treaties afterward. That all the wealth of Haiti for more than a century was being siphoned off to France, even though they were independent. And
Wow.
so, we can talk about the challenges and the growth of the United States in a different lens when we compare it to the other revolutions around us. And we see how much things like race and slavery and stolen land play a role in how a nation develops when we see how other nations that were dealing with the same things developed.
I really appreciate that. I think that I had some working knowledge of a connection between the Haitian Revolution and Independence and the Louisiana Purchase, but
Yes.
not the perspectives that you just shared. Um,
Yeah, the
and
Louisiana Purchase happened because of the Haitian Revolution.
right, and so not something I learned. Like the
Hmm.
the connectedness of the world. Like the idea that we could teach American history in silo is pretty ridiculous, but it
Yes.
didn't occur to me that it is until like way into adulthood.
Hmm.
So when you begin to share parallel history, what's happening here
Hmm.
and what's happening in another location, and how those two events are interacting,
Hmm.
I think that helps us to have it doesn't just help us to have a better perspective in history, right? It helps us to have a better perspective of empathy and being
Hmm.
global citizens and decentering our own stories. So
Hmm.
I love that by telling history, you start to influence our development in emotional intelligence.
Yes, for sure.
That is really mind blowing to me because that's not the way that traditionally I viewed history. And whenever I meet someone who's like, "Ugh, I I can't stand history, right? I just
Mhm.
think about, oh, what a disservice whoever was teaching them history did,
Yes.
because there's so many rich, there's history is like this fabric of all of these stories, right? If there's
Mhm.
not like one story that moves you or connects you or wows you, it's just been told wrong.
Yeah, for sure. That history
Yes.
covers everything that has existed before, no matter the topic. And so it's not something that we can get away from because we live in the shadow of it in every single way, from fashion to housing, to our jobs, to our government. It's all the result of history. And so being able to understand where that came from really changes the way we interact with the world.
Yes. And I also think that if there are, it helps us to better recognize if there are cues to negative parts of history that perhaps a sane person doesn't want to repeat. If
Mhm.
there are like sound bites, or if there is architecture, or if there is language or policy that
Mhm.
is similar to a negative regime or a totalitarian regime,
Mhm.
we would be able to better pick up on those cues the better educated we are about world history
Mhm.
and what those dynamics look like before. And that's something that I'm continuing to learn about world history. I mean, and I think that goes not just for homeschoolers, right?
Mhm.
We're now at a time where we can access information in a way that 30 years ago we wouldn't have been able to. And if you were a homeschooler pre-internet Encyclopedia
Mhm.
Britannica,
Yeah.
you just wouldn't have the options that you like as an academic.
Mhm.
You have access to like first primary sources and secondary sources in a way that hasn't been condensed down to sound bites.
Yeah, absolutely. We live in an era where we have so much access to information, and we can make much better choices because of that.
So I feel very fortunate about that, but also it can be a little bit overwhelming, which is why I think it's really important to have options in history. I don't think every parent, I don't think every educator is going to be an expert in
Mhm.
all of the subject matters that they're delivering, right?
For sure.
But I do think that we can be really intentional in curating what is
Mhm.
on our bookshelf, what products that we buy related to homeschooling and education. And so
Mhm.
it's part of why I think what you're doing with Curiosity Chronicles is so important to the work of educated education in general.
Mhm.
So I do want to ask you, how can people connect with you, and if you have any upcoming projects or things that you'd like folks to know about
Mhm.
related to Curiosity Chronicles and the world history that you cover with those products.
Yeah. So one of the things that I definitely want people to know that I very much brought to my attention at that convention we met at is we have a reputation for being an elementary curriculum because that's where we
Wow.
started.
Mhm.
And that is not all we do. We've recently released an update for our ancient history level, which is our first level because we tell history chronologically. But
Mhm.
we've expanded the reading options for that level so that you can work with our ancient history level up through the beginning of middle school, like up through sixth grade is what it's now recommended for. And
Nice.
then we also have our modern history volume one that I released, I think it was just last year. Um, Time is hard to keep track of these days.
Yeah,
But our
sure.
modern
Sure.
history volume, that is recommended for middle school and up. And so if you've got a middle schooler, if you've got a high schooler, we do have history materials for you. So it's not just for elementary students. And one thing I'd like to highlight with that stuff for middle school and high school students is that we don't just tell like the political wars and battles history. We do tell a whole complete cultural and artistic history. So
Very
those things that
nice.
your middle schooler and high schooler might be really interested in, we're going to be covering them in our books. We have two full chapters on women's rights in the modern history chapter. I know that's something that's pulling a lot of teenagers and they want to know that history. And so we do cover those sorts of topics to make it very accessible for you students. And we also have a film list in our instructor's guide, which works really
Oh,
well for high school
wow.
students to make them allow them to see history and see those different perspectives. So if you're under the impression that this is an elementary curriculum, I would like to correct you. We definitely cover elementary school, but we have materials moving all the way up.
I love it.
So as far as how to connect with us, we have our website, which is curiositychronicles.org. We also have an Instagram and Facebook page. And then on Facebook, we also have a group that's called Curiosity Chronicles Community. And that is where people who are using or are interested in using our curriculum, they can get together and they can talk. So if you want to see how other people are using it, how it's working for them, what doing the activities might look like, people post pictures there. So that's a great place to go and connect if you're just looking into it and you want to hear someone's perspective other than my own. You can go and chat with our community there and hear what people are doing. For our upcoming projects, I'm in the middle of writing Snapshots of Modern History Volume 2. And that's going to be covering from World War I to the end of World War II. And I am really excited about that book. It's going to bring a lot of really important history to the table. We skip World War I all the time in US education. We just like, it
Mhm.
happened. We sent soldiers to Europe. It ended. But like, before I was able to dive into these topics as a historian, I didn't understand, why did it count as a world war? Because it's always taught as
Mm.
something that happened in Europe.
Right.
And so I'm very excited with all the work I've done on World War I to explain why this is a world war, how it did affect everyone across the globe and what that impact was, as well as the interwar years, the rise of fascism, and then, of course, World War II being very important for creating the next century. So that's what I'm working on right now. I don't have a release date on it, but I will keep you updated.
You are busy. I
I
love
am.
it.
I love writing. It is fun. And there's a lot of information people need.
It's true. Yeah, one of the things I joked about when I met you at the convention is I was like, "It's a world history." It's like
Mhm,
there's really no end. There's not gonna
mhm.
be like a
There's
finite
always
end
more
of
to learn.
resources. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So I love that. What I can promise to do is in our show notes, I'll make sure that I include your website and how
Mhm.
to connect with you on socials.
Yeah.
And that way folks can begin to follow you and get familiar with Curiosity Chronicles,
Mhm.
and to be aware of when those release dates come, but also um, a question about curriculums in general
Mhm.
is that usually at some time of year there
Mhm.
is an opportunity. Now, all of year round, you have an opportunity for folks to dip their toe into Curiosity Chronicles and their downloads that are samples that are on your
Mhm.
site that are available
Yes.
to anyone who comes and visits the site. And I think that's
Mhm.
remarkable to be able to test out material. But I also know that when parents are making their homeschool purchases, sometimes they want to do it in tune with the sales
Mhm.
from that particular company. And so I'm wondering, inside scoop,
Yes.
are there upcoming sales on any materials related to Curiosity Chronicles?
Yes, we normally run a back to school sale in July and maybe a little bit into August, and that is coming up soon. Unfortunately, I don't have the exact dates for you because we're in the process of changing our distribution system. We used to use a print on demand service, and now we're moving to having a warehouse and shipping the books ourselves. This is going to be
Wow.
much better shipping time. We're cutting like 3 weeks off your delivery time. And we also are going to have perforated pages on the student guides. So this is going to make it a lot more usable for you as well. And so those books are supposed to be delivered next week. And so we're not going to announce the exact dates of the sale until we have the product in hand and know we can definitely get it to you. But very soon in July, we will be running our back to school sale.
I mean, that's a huge incentive to follow you on social and then connect
Hmm.
to
Yep,
be able
we'll
to
be
see those
announcing it there.
updates. Right. And then I know that for so many homeschool families, they've gotten really intentional. I've had to get more focused and intentional along the way of um, supporting products that support other homeschool families
Hmm.
that are run by um, homeschool moms or homeschool families who, of course, are qualified or who are producing quality materials, right?
Hmm.
But supporting small business, supporting family centered business, because I mentioned earlier, this hustle culture
Hmm.
doesn't just stop with the fear mongering of being behind. It really does normalize that the only way to achieve is for family to go off in separate directions very early on,
Hmm.
and then kind of only come back at night for
Yep.
so the fact that you are carving out space and creating a product that is counter to that is really
Hmm.
impressive. And I just wanted to make sure that we took a moment to showcase that because I know that you mentioned just some barriers to the traditional, I don't know, conference circuit, which
Hmm.
doesn't benefit the consumer or homeschool families or alternative education at all. So I'm
Yeah.
really glad that you were so flexible and willing to come on
Yeah.
and talk
Happy to be
about
here.
Curiosity Chronicles, and even your personal journey. Like, I feel
Mhm.
like that's a huge story because home educators can relate to home educators. Like, the
Mhm.
story doesn't have to be exactly the same for it to resonate. So I really appreciate it there. I wonder if there is anything in terms of, I know we said, 5 questions, if there's anything along the way as we went through you
Mhm.
sharing that you were like, you know what, I really wish that Tahira and See.Mom.Learn would have asked this question. And if there's anything that you feel like maybe I left out in those 5 questions, I want to give you an opportunity to think about that now and share.
Yeah. Well, like you were saying there at the end, how great it is to be able to support other homeschooling families and homeschoolers when you're buying homeschool products. One of the reasons I think that's so great is that we understand what it's like to actually be a homeschooler. Because as
Mm,
I'm searching for secular products, I'm very often on Teachers Pay Teachers, which has a lot of fabulous products, but they're
mhm.
designed for a public school classroom, and I have to adapt them to my homeschooling environment. And that takes effort, and sometimes it doesn't quite work out. And so that is something that I try to bake into everything we do. Yeah,
Sometimes it would only work if you had a homeschool room of 30.
right. Yeah. It's like divide into 15 teams of two.
Yes, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay,
But accommodating that homeschool environment is baked into our curriculum from the beginning. We do have some public schools that are reaching out to us and trying to adapt it to the public school environment. So they're doing the reverse of what we normally do. Um,
nice.
but we have so much accommodation for neurodivergent learners just baked into the way that it's done. It's not an afterthought. It's not something you have to change. It's simply how the curriculum is designed. Like all our books are available as audiobooks so that if you do have that busy, you're going
Wow.
everywhere
Mhm.
schedule, you can listen in the car because we understand how many places you have to be as a homeschooler. And that there's nothing that is required with our curriculum. That, if there's something where you're like, I don't have the time to do that, I don't want to do a hands on activity this week, I can't get that book from my library, you can skip. And it's not going to prevent you from being able to complete the next thing. I think a lot of curriculums require you to do everything in order and do all of the things, or, oh no, you have a hole in what you're learning. And so we've built in that flexibility that homeschoolers need because I understand what it's like to be like, this week is not happening. This week, we're not going to do all the bells and whistles. Or, you know
Right.
what? I did put that book on hold at the library, but then something happened and I don't actually have the book in time. And so I think that's one of the benefits of shopping from a business by and for homeschoolers is the understanding of what it's actually like on the ground and what accommodations you need in your teaching.
Excellent. So I appreciate that. And what I heard in terms of accommodations is the emphasis on flexibility and
Hmm.
inclusiveness,
Hmm.
um, right from the origination of the materials.
Hmm.
So I think that is really phenomenal and just a reason to take a second look and to be able to download those sample materials. So wonderful.
Yeah.
So I look forward to being able to follow you and see how things evolve with your upcoming projects in the
Hmm.
future. I will absolutely include your contact information and the contact information on socials.
Hmm.
Um, and I appreciate you carving out time for See.Mom.Learn and telling us a little bit more about Curiosity Chronicles.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
So until next time, we're going to wish you love, light, and living books from See.Mom.Learn. Thanks, everybody.